How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great.
Um,
Where do we find you?
yeah, it's nice to meet you. So I've been trying to get a different perspective on different artists, and I came across you actually kind of by accident because I was looking for meditative music, and
Hmm.
I heard the Book of Secrets, and I just absolutely fell in love with it.
Oh, great.
Absolutely love it. To get right into this, I know you only have a little bit of time, but can you tell me about your musical journey and how you were drawn to Celtic music, if you don't mind?
Yeah, my musical journey began in a small town in southern Manitoba called Morden, and my mother had enrolled me in piano lessons at the age of 5, and then my piano teacher made it a prerequisite for all of her piano students to be part of a children's choir. So I started singing when I was 5, which was before I could read words or read music. So I was learning music by ear, not through my visual sense. And I really felt that that was a significant piece of the jigsaw puzzle that I became, all those brain synapses were built that way rather than through your eyes. I then when I became a teenager, I loved folk music, but it was more like Peter, Paul and Mary and Simon and Garfunkel and Joni Mitchell, that whole era of wonderful folk music. And then I took my grade 12 in Winnipeg. And then I simply moved to Winnipeg. And when I was there, I was part of a folk club that got together on Sunday nights. And that folk club had various members that were from Scotland, Ireland, and England, and Wales, and so on. And so we shared swapped vinyl, and we learned pieces off of the vinyl or from each other, and we played in these sessions. And it was at that traditional music session at that folk club that I first became exposed to Celtic music. It wasn't that I grew up with it on my father or my grandmother's knee. It was much later in my life, as a young adult, but I was smitten by it. It had less to do with the fact that some of my ancestry comes from Scotland and Ireland. It was more something that is very infectious in the Celtic modality. And I knew that I wanted that to be part of my life. I never thought that, frankly, that I would go on and make a career out of it. I always wanted to be a veterinarian. So that's really how I became introduced to it. And it wasn't until about 1990, 91 that I attended an exhibition in Venice that was the most extensive exhibition ever assembled on the Celts. A lot of artifacts that emerged from former Eastern Bloc countries in the former Soviet Union. And I learned at that time that the Celts were much more than this mad collection of anarchists from Scotland and Ireland and Wales, but they were this vast collection of tribes that had fanned out across Europe and into Asia Minor and dated back to about 500 BC. And I used that pan-Celtic history then as my creative springboard rather than performing or learning and recording traditional material.
So when you approach writing music, like I wouldn't really know even where to begin if I was going to write a Celtic song. And you know, so I mean, even listening to it, maybe have some of the inspiration from what I've heard, but to do it at the level that you do it at, it's as if you have a really good understanding of the whole um, genre and
It's a
style.
feeling, it's less an intellectual understanding than it is a feeling that there's that modality. When I say modality, they're often pieces well, they're more in jigs and reels perhaps that are in fifths, or if you get into melodies, some absolutely exquisite, sweet, sweet melodies in the Celtic tradition. And so it's for me, it was immersing myself in those aspects that said, okay, I'm now going to create my own material that is very much inspired by it. And I suppose one could argue it's part of the Celtic music diaspora.
Do you approach writing music in theory as in modal theory, like music theory, or do you approach it from inspiration of other Celtic music that you've listened to? And what kind of artists are you listening to inspire that whole approach?
Yeah, it's the latter approach. I'm not graded in to academics when it comes to music theory. I work from a very different part of the brain, and it is immersing myself in and learning it as an oral kind of experience rather than, as I said, a visual one from the very beginning. So, some of the first people that I heard and I fell madly in love with would have been like Mary Black. Remember her performance, a recording of Anarchy Gordon, which is just stunning. Um, Bothy Band, playing Stee, some of the Steel-Eyed Span, the Waterstones from England. Um, and hearing some of Alain Stivell, who's a harper from Brittany. Now he'd do a bit of singing, but there was still something in Alain Stivell's work, which he's a harper from Brittany. I heard his recording Celtic Harp Renaissance and live in Dublin. And I would go to sleep listening to these albums when I lived in Winnipeg. I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and of course, it was an era of only vinyl. And I recorded the whole album onto the tape recorder, so I could go upstairs and listen to the whole album without going downstairs and turning it over and coming back. So he also was, and of course, some of the chieftains. But those would be some of the people. June Tabor, Maddie Pryor, really fantastic.
So when you write, do you write with a piano or do you write with a group of musicians that are um,
I write
really
by myself at the piano. I write. Sometimes I come with melodies that I don't even sit at an instrument. They might just be floating through my mind. I might just quickly notate them in a notebook when, sometimes they've come at the darndest places. I think I know the piece of Marco Polo is not something overtly Celtic. It fits more into a Middle Eastern kind of feeling. But I remember coming up with that melody on the floor of a television station, maybe in Greece somewhere. And we're just fooling around, so that you never know when these moments will come. Even so, my inspiration comes in different ways and from different directions and different unpredictable times. And then there are times I try to carve out and I say, okay, I'm going to try to write something today or continue working on a piece, because sometimes you just have to walk away from a piece and come at it fresh. I'm not a very good manufacturer of pieces. They have to kind of come up from the ground and surprise me sometimes.
like, yeah, totally be inspired without trying to force it. I understand what
Yes.
that's like.
Mhm.
Now, how do you research and incorporate these stories into your music? I think you already pretty much mentioned that.
Mhm.
Um, Now, as far as the other instruments that are involved, do you write the other instruments, or do you guys just get together, you come up with the piece, and then they just kind of like jam it out? But they
Yeah,
often
well,
have to have that Celtic kind of background, don't they? Or influence.
Uh, to a degree, I mean, some have more than others. When I think of, there's my core group of musicians: Brian Hughes, Caroline Lavelle, Hugh Marsh, now the bass player Dudley Phillips. Um, Caroline and Brian come from a greater familiarity with the Celtic music than, let's say, Hugh or Dudley. When I go into a recording session, however, I often bring in, whole other layers of musicians, um, depending if I'm wanting a piper or a bodhrán player. But of course, as you know, as the years went on, working on a fusion of more overtly Celtic instruments and players and Eastern or Middle Eastern or even period instruments like the viol da gamba and so on. And so I get them there, and I would have the basic chord structure and the melody. And I played it for the musicians. Then I would talk in terms of imagery, because I think every song that I've written or recorded, there is a picture in my mind's eye that's fixed. It's there. It was developed when I was working. And so once that imagery distills and becomes fixed, then I feel I'm ready to work with the musicians, because I then go about trying to paint the landscape and paint this image in my mind. The piece that sticks out in one way, for example, is on an ancient muse, the Gates of Istanbul piece. And I'd been reading a lot. I traveled through different parts of Turkey and spent, different times in Istanbul. But I was reflecting back on the time more of the Ottoman Empire and silk roads and so on, caravanserais. So I said to the musicians, my image is this. I see it's coming back from a campaign maybe 200 years, 300 years ago, camels, there might be some horses. People are coming back to Istanbul or Constantinople, depending when you're talking about. And it's hot. And so I want the lilt of the music, the rhythmic part, to have this kind of it's sitting on a Middle Eastern bed of a rhythmic pattern. But I said to the violinist Hugh Marsh, who modifies his fiddle like through technology and so on, I said, I'm also wanting to create a sound that represents the mirage, the heat that comes off the land, that mirage. And so he starts experimenting with things, and I say, that's it right there, that's it. And so that we want to lay that in from at the very beginning. And so often my pieces will have lengthy introductions.
I think that's beautiful. I think it's beautiful how you approach writing, because it's like telling a story. And it's exactly what it is you're telling a story, and you have to have some kind of vision to really be able to get that story to come across, because
it's very picture oriented in my mind, the whole exercise. Instead of paints on a canvas, it's the musicians and the instruments. So I speak to them in pictures and imagery and sensory information. They say, okay, got it, and there we go.
that's absolutely beautiful, that approach. I've never thought of it that way, because usually when most people write, it's you're just focusing on more of the song structure, at least for me.
Yeah.
I approach it more from the music theory aspect of it, so I guess that kind of limits me, but I think
not necessarily.
really open up my mind, or anybody's mind in general, if you approached it as like a picture and like a painting. And I think it's absolutely beautiful how you describe that, because I think that comes across through your music. Because
Well, when I research a recording in a particular era and geography to do with the Celts, I travel there. Like with Mask and Mir, I travel to the northwest coast of Spain, throughout Spain, and into Morocco. When I was working on the Book of Secrets, I was sort of relatively focused on the connection of the Celts in the region of Italy and the Etruscans, and hence Dante and Dante's Prayer. And I was kind of loosely focused on that. An ancient muse was east from there, more like Greece and Turkey, and the Celts connection of that period. So so I travel to all these places, sometimes a couple of times, and I gather information about the light in the sky, the smell on the streets, the sound of what's going on in the countryside. I mean, I remember, for example, attending an archaeological site just outside of Ankara that was being worked on by the people from the University of Pennsylvania, and they were working on a a Celtic strata of that archaeological site. I remember spending a whole day there in May, and the imagery of the countryside, the sound of the birds, all of this kind of adds up as sensory information that then creates that picture or informs that picture that from which I then go and, do the arrangements.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you pretty much absorb the whole atmosphere and try to incorporate that the best that you can into your music.
Yeah, yeah.
It definitely comes across because listening to like a Book of Secrets, for example, when I first heard that, and I was like totally blown away because I come from like a totally different background, metal, hardcore metal and stuff like that. So I would never admit to liking anything other than metal when I was growing up. So and then I just listened to that. It was like it takes you on a journey. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
absolutely love it. And the imagery, as you mentioned, is all there and it's the symbolism and it's absolutely beautiful. Now, how do you think being a musician has really inspired your personal growth as an individual? Because I know for me, it's helped me in many areas of my life
Mhm,
and taught me self-discipline and dedication and all these different
mhm.
qualities. So how do you think it's really helped you to develop as a person?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a variety of angles, and one can respond to that. I mean, as I mentioned at the very beginning, or at least I think I did, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. I never dreamed about being a singer. And so I kind of accidentally fell into this career path, and I never had an appetite for fame or all the trappings that come with it. I still feel I've got the mindset of a veterinarian. Um, so it's been interesting to reconcile all that stuff that comes with a very public kind of profile, and still keep your bearings as a person, as an average citizen, That's been an interesting aspect of things. I think the other thing is that when I packed in my very, very brief university education, and I ended up turning to my this pursuit of the history of the Celts to compensate for the lack of that formal education. And hence the travels, and I would read books and watch documentaries and listen to I would immerse myself in all directions about things. So I realized that one of the biggest takeaways is in all the travels that I've had, many parts of the world, Europe and Middle East and Japan and China and Siberia, that people are pretty much the same. They need to be loved, have a need to belong, have a need to be heard. Um, that this is one of the biggest, that we're all pretty much the same in our needs
I,
and our, yeah.
I totally agree with that. And if you start looking at things that way, then you have a lot more compassion for people. And
Yeah.
but so I know that you only have a couple minutes. So I again I want to thank you so much, for taking
Oh,
the
my
time.
pleasure.
I really love your music and I'm looking forward to hearing anything new that you have coming along. So
Yes,
I know
thank
you
you.
did, were you on tour just recently or are you doing a tour and what do you have up coming up next?
Yes, well, it's a kind of oddball couple years because partially informed by COVID. And we were all, before COVID, we were planning to do a certain anniversary touring. So once COVID was roughly, contained, last a year ago in September, and then last fall and then this spring we did certain chapters of The Visit Revisited. We were in the United States, but in the Northeast and up to about Minneapolis, and we came up to Winnipeg and did 4 shows in Canada last fall. We finished the next chapter, as it were, of the visit revisited in Europe, more in Northern Europe, like Germany, Switzerland, Belgium. We did a couple days in Italy, Netherlands, England, in the spring. And then we're about to go back, but do a mask and mirror tour, anniversary tour in more southern Europe. So we're like at the Acropolis in Athens, and it's some pretty spectacular places. While at the same time promoting the Mask and Mirror Live, which is a live recording we recorded at the Palace of Fine Arts in 1994 in San Francisco. But also this other unusual project called The Road Back Home, which harkens back to my very earliest days of Celtic music. So we've got this oddball collection of recordings and tours. So
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing you on tour, Loreena. Again, I want to thank you sincerely for your time. I have a million questions for you, but I know your time is limited. So I want to thank you
sorry
so
for that.
much. I hope to see you on the road, and
Yeah,
want to wish you the very best in your endeavors, and God bless you. And
yeah,
thank Mark for me too as well.
I will indeed.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks so much for your
All right.
interest and support.
Thank
Take
you
care,
so
John.
much. Yep.
Bye.
Here, bye-bye.